Hello, my name is Fire Captain Joe Lowe. I will be your instructor today in this video, Wildland Essentials Fireline Safety. I've spent the majority of my career in the suppression of wildland fires, and I wanted to give you a little bit about my background. I have worked numerous overhead assignments. I am a field observer and situation unit leader. As part of an air tanker flight crew, I provide wildland expertise. I am a master instructor at the state level and teach wildland fire control. I teach to community colleges and various government agencies. In this video, you will learn wildland fire safety. During the 1994 fire season, 34 firefighters were lost in the United States. Pay close attention to the concepts presented in this video. They may save your life and keep us from adding your name to a memorial such as this, which is dedicated to the El Carrizo hotshots who perished in a fire on the Angeles National Forest. Let's talk about your first line of defense against a wildland fire, your protective clothing, and your fire shelter. Your Nomex will reflect 43% of the radiant energy of a fire, and 34% will be absorbed within the fiber. The remaining 18% will be transmitted to the skin, and the human skin will absorb all the heat it receives. That is why it is important to use a second layer of cotton clothing under your Nomex. From these statistics, you can see how important your protective clothing is on Fireline. Your clothing should not have tears or holes in it and should be kept clean. Check it often and replace it before it will be needed. Let's first look at your Nomex pants. Note that they have snaps that allow you to secure them around your boots. Your Nomex shirt has snaps at the bottom of the sleeve that make the sleeve fit tight around your glove. It also has a high collar to help you protect your face from the radiant heat. Worn under your Nomex shirt would be a plain, white, long-sleeve cotton t-shirt with no emblems. This second layer of clothing will help minimize the radiant heat that would normally be absorbed by the skin. Now let's look at your helmet. There are three types of helmets worn on a wildland fire. This is a structure helmet worn by municipal fire companies involved in interface fire protection. The other two helmets are wildland helmets. This single-brimmed helmet is worn on wildland incidents. And this wide-brimmed helmet is also worn on wildland incidents, but has a brim all the way around the helmet and protects the back of the neck. You will see all three being worn on a wildland fire. The important thing is that you have a helmet on, and it should have a shroud for your neck and face protection. Helmets offer you protection from the heat and falling objects. Always wear goggles and have them on when on the fire line. They should have plastic lenses or industrial safety glass lenses. A bandana should be worn in areas where it is smoky. It will help filter out some of the smoke particles. However, it will not provide you any protection against carbon monoxide. Do not wear a wet bandana. A wet bandana produces high humidity air, which can damage the lungs more quickly at a lower temperature than dry air can. One new product that's out on the market that offers great potential for preventing facial injuries is called the Hot Shield. This product is a Nomex face piece which will protect the face from burns. It seems to be the best way to date to protect your airway and face in the event of a burnover. Follow your agency policy regarding the use of a bandana or the Hot Shield. Gloves should be worn at all times when fighting a wildland fire. The gloves should be made of leather and fit well, and the wrist area should have a knit fire-resistive wristlet. Boots should fit well and be made of leather. They should be the lace-up type with at least an 8-inch top. I do not recommend boots with a steel toe or shank, as they retain heat on Fireline. You may want to consider a custom pair of boots like these Nicks made in Spokane, Washington. They're hand-lasted, fit well, and offer great support. The thick all-leather sole will insulate you while working on hotline. Your fire shelter is the most important piece of fire safety equipment you have. Never enter a fire area without one. The fire shelter has a proven safety record. Since 1977, there have been 650 to 700 known shelter deployments, or about 38 per year. The 700 deployments resulted in about 250 lives saved, 250 serious burns prevented, and 200 precautionary deployments. Often these precautionary deployments minimized radiant heat, smoke inhalation, and minor burns, all valid reasons for using your fire shelter. A fire shelter comes in a case that should be worn on your web gear that you wear on Fireline. Never leave it on the engine. The case should have a Velcro closure and quick pull strap. Inside the case you will find a shelter enclosed in plastic. It will have a red tab that works like a zipper. Once pulled, the shelter should be removed and deployed. Fire shelter protects primarily by reflecting radiant heat. It reflects 95% of the radiant heat. A fire shelter will melt at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Forest fire temperatures are typically around 1100 degrees and can peak at 1800 degrees. A shelter can tolerate some flame contact, but cannot tolerate sustained flame contact. Therefore, keep it away from heavy fuels as they produce great fireline intensities. In July of 1994, 14 people died trying to escape a fire while carrying their packs and tools. The fire was the South Canyon Fire in Colorado. Findings have shown, had they dropped everything except their fire shelter and ran to safety, they would have all escaped safely. Now we will learn how to deploy our fire shelter. There are two types of deployments, a static deployment and a dynamic deployment, depending on how close the flaming front is to you. The first deployment we will be learning is a dynamic deployment. Dynamic deployment is done if the fire is close at hand. First, throw your hand tool, unsnap your web gear, pull the shelter from its protective case. Then drop your web gear, remove the shelter from its plastic, and hit the ground flat where the air is not superheated. Then flake your shelter out, using your arms and legs to help you get into the shelter. Once inside the shelter, roll over and seal all the flaps. When this is done, make an airspace to insulate yourself from the fire. Cover your head and face to protect your airway. Always have your feet toward the fire if the wind permits. Research has shown that once you have dropped your tools and pack, you will be able to run 15 to 20% faster. You will not have a tool to clear fuels with, so look for a natural cleared area or a low fuel type. This technique is done flat on the ground, which is your optimum survival zone. The dynamic deployment technique shown in this video was developed by Los Angeles County Fire Department, Camp Number 2, and is the result of the Storm King incident. Now we will learn a static shelter deployment technique. The firefighter has just found a deployment area. Notice he picked an area that was as free of fuels as possible and is away from heavy fuel concentrations. If time permits, clear away ground fuels and try to make at least a 4x8 clearing. After this is done, discard your hand tools and all flammable items such as fusees or chainsaws. Remove the shelter from its case. Once this is done, pull the plastic pull tab, peel the rest of the plastic off, flake out the shelter, open the top, then rotate the shelter, continuing to open it, and place a leg in it, then place both arms in the shelter, and then place your second leg in it, and fall to the ground in a pup tent configuration. Seal all flaps with your arms and legs, and leave an airspace inside for insulation. Keep calm with your face to the ground. Your feet should be toward the fire. I'll now show you a second way to do a static deployment. It differs from the first only in that the shelter is not rotated and the arms are placed in the shelter first. Once the shelter is removed from the case and is free of the plastic, flake it out. Use the wind to your best advantage. After the shelter is opened, insert your arms inside the shelter and under the top hold-down straps. Place your feet in the lower hold-down straps and fall to the ground. Once this is done, check your shelter seal and have your feet toward the fire. Remember though, if you must make a choice, it is better to be on the ground deploying your shelter before the flame front arrives than to be standing and trying to get into your shelter when the fire arrives. Never hesitate to deploy your fire shelter. Waiting could cost your life. And always protect your airway at all costs. Many have not and have died. In figuring where to deploy your shelter, never deploy under power lines or snags. Don't forget to look up. Terrain features such as chimneys and saddles should be avoided. Deploy away from heavy fuel. If you deploy on a steep hill, then dig a toe hold so as not to slide out of your shelter. You don't want to slide out of the shelter when the fire arrives. If you are deploying fire shelters as a group, remember to deploy them close to each other. This will result in mutual shielding and definitely enhance crew morale. Crew supervisors will also have better control over their crews. Stay calm and support each other while talking back and forth. Never leave your fire shelter until the flaming front is passed. Wait for an all clear from your supervisor, or if you're alone, wait for the shelter to cool. Firefighters have died coming out of their fire shelter too soon. Stay put. Remember, a fire shelter can save your life.
And while in the shelter, you can expect winds in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range. While we were in there, it did get hot. Gloves were an absolute necessity as far as being able to hold the sides of the shelter down. In the strong winds, the shelter is going to flap. It's going to come down right over your head, and it's going to hit your back. It didn't seem to make any difference as far as its effectiveness.
During the time, though, you know, everybody was really scared because you didn't know what to expect. I think that was probably the worst thing about it, was just really didn't know what to expect. Once we were down and it hit us, we were pretty much talking to each other after it hit us, because when it did hit us, the noise was just, it was tremendous. You know, it was like all these jets just flying over you. So we were all just talking to each other, trying to get our mind off the fire and joking around as much as we could. You know, everybody knew, though, that it was pretty serious. You know, it was definitely a life and death matter.
And the only thing I got to say for a fire shelter, treat them and treat them right. They save our life. Don't mistreat them, and make sure when you get a new person that they know how to use it. Don't just handle a fire shelter to an individual and expect him to use it. Give them some training. So whatever you do, take care of that shelter. Don't walk around the woods without it. You save our life, you might save yours.
Here are some important points to remember during deployment. Always have your fire shelter with you. Never hesitate to deploy your shelter if it is necessary. Never deploy your shelter under power lines or snags. Protect your airway. Deploy in the lowest fuel concentrations. Always avoid chimneys and saddles. Deploy shelters close to each other. On a steep slope, dig a toe hold. If time permits, clear a 4x8 area. Do not wet your bandana or clothes. Have a drinking water supply inside the shelter. Discard your fusees, chainsaws, and fuel bottles away from your shelter. Always wear your protective clothing. Check your shelter seal. Maintain an air space inside the shelter. Keep your face close to the ground. Take slow, relaxed breaths. Keep calm. Communicate with other crew members. Limit your movement inside the shelter. Wait for an all clear to come out. Wait for the shelter to cool if you are alone. What about vehicle and building entrapments? Agency policies differ regarding the use of a shelter near or around a vehicle. The 1996 edition of Your Fire Shelter Beyond the Basics states the following. There are no known instances where some people have deployed fire shelters just outside a vehicle while others stayed inside. Without such a comparison, recommendations are tentative. Ongoing field testing needs to take place where vehicles and shelters are placed side by side at controlled burns for comparative data. If you regularly travel to wildland fires where you may be at risk, practice locating places to park and practice lining the windows with a fire shelter. Practice exiting the cab with your fire shelter on. Never leave your vehicle without having all the windows and doors closed and your fire shelter on. Also practice getting under your fire shelter after you exit the vehicle. Always consider your proximity to fuels and the position on the slope when parking your vehicle. Downwind or upslope locations receive more radiant heat. If you are trapped in your vehicle, don't panic. Line the window of your vehicle and get on the floor and face the door away from the fire. Pull coats over your body for extra radiant heat protection. In light fuels, the flame front will last about 30 seconds and the heat will dissipate quickly. In heavier fuels, such as brush and forested areas, the flame and intense heat will likely last 2 to 5 minutes. If the fire is too intense and the smoke or heat gets great, the vehicle interior ignites or the windows blow out, with your fire shelter wrapped around you, exit the vehicle on the side away from the fire and get quickly to the ground. If you are not trapped in your vehicle and you have time before the flaming front reaches you, get out of your vehicle and deploy your shelter on the side of the road away from the oncoming fire. Get into your shelter well before the flaming front arrives. Most road beds are survival zones and your chances of survival are excellent. Again, always evaluate your proximity to heavier type fuels. Let's talk about building entrapment, since we have seen an increase in wildland interface fires in recent years. First, determine if the building can provide you enough protection to warrant using it as a temporary barrier. Make sure the house is well built and it is not too close to concentrations of heavy fuels. If it appears that the structure will provide you some temporary protection before it burns down, you can give consideration to using it. However, if it is to be used as a safe refuge area, make sure you leave the door unlocked and closed. The windows should also be closed in the entire house. If time permits before you enter, remove heavy and highly flammable fuels that are next to the house and turn off the propane tank. At all times on a fire line, wear your web gear and fire shelter and wear it into the house with you. In addition, I take a shovel with me inside the house in the event that my engine has been burned over by the passage of the flaming front. You can use a shovel to help you as a tool to fight the fire as you walk out of the area. If your engine is equipped with breathing apparatus, take them inside with you also. Once inside, make sure all the doors and windows are closed. Remove light curtains from windows and close any heavy window coverings. Move the furniture away from the windows. Stay on the first floor near a door or window that is on the side away from the advancing flames, and remember to stay low. Be prepared to exit quickly in case the heat and smoke forces you from the structure. If you are forced from the house, wrap yourself in your fire shelter, stay low, and find a place to quickly deploy your fire shelter on the ground. A well-built house will offer you protection before it burns down. The flaming front will usually have passed before the house burns to the ground. You must understand wildland fire behavior if you are involved in any kind of suppression activity in the wildland, because all tactical decisions and safety concerns are based on your understanding of these principles. In this section you will learn wildland fire behavior watchouts. Extreme care should be used in these situations. First, let's look at terrain features that cause us concern as firefighters. A chimney is a steep draw that channels all the convective energy up the slope. A saddle is a low topography point between two high points. Saddles are points of least resistance for winds and convective energy. Fires will push through the low point at a rapid rate of spread during uphill fire runs. Narrow canyons are situations that require great care. The problem with narrow canyons is that the canyon walls are so close together that spotting can easily occur on the canyon wall opposite the main fire. Box canyons are dangerous because they only have one way in and one way out. Box canyons act like chimneys, providing avenues of intense updrafts and a potential for blow-up conditions. Let's talk about a terrain feature that requires special care and attention, the mid-slope road. The danger in a mid-slope road is that you may have active fire below you and unburned fuel above you. The main fire may spot above you and cause you to be trapped between two bodies of fire. Aspect is another concern when evaluating topography and fire. Aspect is the direction the slope faces. We know that fuels on a southern aspect are lighter and we can expect more rapid rates of spread. Southern exposures receive maximum solar influence. Eastern aspects heat earlier because the sun heats the slope first. You can also expect earlier upslope winds on eastern aspects as a result of early heating. On northern aspects, you will find heavier concentrations of heavy-type fuels. Fires on northern aspects generally burn slower, but with a great intensity. West aspects have late heating and transitional fuels. Another consideration in regard to aspect is time of day. At different times of each day, on each of the aspects, we find fine fuels receiving maximum solar influence. When this happens, the earth and ground fuels heat, and then they heat the surrounding air. Note the surface temperature of 160 degrees in the direct sun area and the 110-degree temperature in the shaded area. This heating of the air close to the surface causes a reduction of humidity and wind. Fine fuel moistures in the shaded area are 8%, while the moistures in the unshaded area are 3%. Eastern aspects peak at about 0900 hours. Southern aspects peak at 1200 hours. Western aspects peak at about 1500 hours. At 12 noon, a northern aspect will peak. However, north aspects have the highest fuel moisture and the lowest daytime temperature. Times may vary slightly due to the seasonal changes. I believe that weather is the most critical element of fire behavior and causes us the most concern as firefighters. Let's talk about the wind as the first factor. Simply said, the stronger the wind, the faster the rate of spread of the fire. Wind causes the fire to increase its rate of spread by bringing an additional supply of oxygen to the fire, and it moves the flames closer to the fuels and preheats them. It will also cause sparks and embers to be transported in the convective column and thus generate spot fires ahead of the main fire. Here are 2 rules of thumb that will help you understand how significant a factor wind is on your fire. As the wind speed doubles, the rate of spread doubles. Double the rate of spread and the fire line intensity will increase 4 times. Wind can cause an eddy effect as it blows across a ridgetop. The danger for the firefighter working on the lee side of a ridge is possible entrapment between 2 fires. The eddy effect can cause the fire to spot on the lee side and cause it to advance toward your position near the ridge. Frontal passages are of concern to firefighters because of the wind shifts. A front is a boundary between 2 air masses. Winds blow clockwise in a high pressure area and the winds blow counterclockwise in a low pressure area. As the front passes, expect to see the prevailing wind shift. Thunderheads are of great concern to firefighters. Thunderheads are violent local storms produced by cumulonimbus clouds. As a mature thunderhead cell approaches, the wind will change and be drawn toward the mature cell. As the mature cell passes over, fire crews can expect strong erratic winds that can blow the fire in many directions. Let's talk about some thunderstorm safety rules. Expect a noticeable increase in wind speed and a sudden reversal in wind direction. Stay out of dry creek beds. Do not use radios or telephones while lightning is occurring in your area. Put down all tools in open country. Sit or lie down if in open country. Avoid grouping together. Do not handle flammable materials in open containers. Stay in or take shelter in a vehicle. Turn off machinery or electric motors. Take shelter in a building if available. Avoid ridgetops, hilltops, wide open spaces, ledges, rock outcroppings, and exposed shelters. When there is no shelter, avoid high objects such as lone trees. If only isolated trees are nearby, the best protection is to crouch in the open, keeping a distance of twice the height of the tree away. Keep away from wire fences, telephone lines, and electrically conductive elevated objects. If you feel an electric charge, if your hair stands on end, or your skin tingles, lightning may be about to strike you. You must drop to the ground immediately. Burning wildland fuels provide the thermal energy at a wildland fire. Each burns at a different rate and intensity. Always watch where you park in relation to your fuel bed. Park your engine away from heavy type fuels. Watch the fuel loading next to the roadway. Heavy concentrations next to the road may be burning when you need to exit the area. Watch the tree coverings or canopy on the road as you drive into your assignment area. Heavy concentrations of aerial fuels may be a trap if you are about to exit the area. Additional fire watch-outs. Areas of continuous fine fuels. Heavy loading of dead and downed trees. Tight crown spacing of trees within 20 feet. Numerous snags. A preheated canopy. Areas with lots of frost and bug kill. Areas with a high dead to live fuel ratio. Relative humidity levels below 25% where there are many fine fuels present. Prolonged drought conditions. Seasonal drying where live fuel moistures are at critical levels. High temperatures above 85 degrees. An aspect with increasing fuel temperatures. The following safety rules are of paramount importance when fighting a fire in the wildland fire environment. An important acronym that you should remember is LCES. It takes some of the most important parts of fire orders and the 18 situations that shout "watch out" and puts them into an easy-to-remember form. L stands for lookouts. The importance of a lookout cannot be overstated. They can advise you of developing problems before it affects your operation or causes you a safety problem. A lookout should be an experienced and competent member of your crew. He needs to be able to realize a problem is developing and communicate it. He needs to update the fire officer on any changes in the fire situation. If a problem develops, he needs to sound the alarm early. He can tell the fire officer if the fire has spotted below his location or across the control line, or note changes in fire weather. A lookout should also take periodic weather readings with a belt weather kit and pass this information on to the fire officer. This will enable the fire officer to adjust his tactical plans. These are just a couple of examples of things he should look for. Remember, though, that every member of the crew should note fire or weather changes and pass them on to the fire officer in case the lookout did not notice them. C stands for communications. Communications can be a problem on any large wildland incident. The first thing a fire officer should do is communicate to his crew the escape route and safe zones. Then talk about radio frequencies and backups if the primary frequencies are overloaded. If the radio goes down, have an alternate plan in place. When in charge of a strike team, you will want to know the position of the units, the progress they are making, or any resource needs they have. This will help you know that your tactical objectives are being met. E is for escape route. Have more than one and make sure that that escape route is easily accessible to all, even your slowest person. Consider fatigue and temperature factors when planning an escape route. Everyone should know the escape routes. You will need to reevaluate your escape routes as fire conditions change. S is for safe zone. A safe zone should be large enough to be survivable without a fire shelter for your entire crew. They can be a clean burned area, rocky areas, or water features. These are natural safety zones. Man-made features may be constructed sites, houses, or roadway surfaces. Upon arrival to your assigned area, evaluate your fire line factors and intensities when considering your safe zone. Your safe zone should not be under power lines. Vehicles can be used for a safe zone. However, all doors and windows need to be closed and fuel proximity needs to be evaluated. If the vehicle sits right next to a steep slope with heavy fuel loading, then consider another safe zone. Remember, you should pre-plan LCES with your crew. Everyone should have common communications. Everyone should know the escape routes you pick. All tactical plans should be discussed and adhered to. All firefighters should be informed and understand your tactical plan, escape routes, and how they are able to communicate with their supervisor. Constantly reevaluate and update your LCES plan. In addition to LCES, go back and review the fire orders and 18 situations that shout "watch out" before fire season. It is important that you are aware of other fire line hazards to watch out for while working on a wildland fire. The first one we will be discussing is snags. Snags and widowmakers are the #2 killer of firefighters on fire lines. A snag is basically a dead or dying tree that is still standing. It can have varying degrees of rotten wood within it, and sometimes the root structure is also rotten. Snags fall with little sound.
Incident that I was on was in the fire season of 1992, Silver Creek Fire. And it was a pretty scary incident to be on. We had quite a few people, quite a few personnel on the fire that were involved with a fatality. And it affected me in a way I don't think I'll ever forget it. I know I won't. What happened was a snag fell and it hit a firefighter on the line. And, her life was taken for no reason, you know. Makes you sit back and wonder why it happened and, you know, how you could have changed it, but the end result's still the same. You just wish there was more that you could have done about it.
When fighting a fire in an area with numerous trees burning, remember to look for snags. Always look at the base of the tree to see if it's burned through, and look above you to see if there are any branches that may fall on you. Remember to post lookouts, and remember that every person in your crew is a lookout. Green trees that have burnt through in previous years and trees that were burnt through are dangerous. Here is a list of snag watchouts. The wind has just picked up. You have leaning dead trees. You are having airdrops from fixed or rotary wing aircraft. Dozers are working in the area. Mop-up operations that cut root systems. Mop-up operations with strong hose streams that wash away the soil around the roots. Identify and report snags in your area. Flag them and give them plenty of room. After they have been flagged, avoid them. If you're going to fall the tree, make sure that you are trained in that type of operation. On any wildland fire of any size, you will be working around bulldozers. These large pieces of equipment are very effective at removing vegetation in a fire's path and constructing fire control lines. When working around a bulldozer, it is important to remember that the operator has limited visibility due to the dust and smoke. Bulldozers are powerful, and they are also capable of dislodging large rocks. They are to be respected on Fireline. Here are some safety rules to remember when working around a dozer. If you are working downhill of a dozer, watch for large displaced rocks rolling downhill. When working around a dozer, keep a 200-foot radius as a safe zone. Dozers can change direction very quickly. Do not get immediately in front or behind a dozer. Never sleep or sit down around or under a dozer. Never get on or off a moving dozer. Remain in full view of the operator at all times. Have a good headlamp or reflective vest on when working around a dozer at night. Use hand signals for direction and safety. Don't ride on a dozer. Never approach a dozer unless the operator knows you are there and requests that you approach. When you approach the dozer, approach it at a 45-degree angle from the front. The operator has a better view from this angle. If you climb up to talk to the operator, make sure the blade is down. Use the handholds and watch for slippery tracks. Aircraft are usually deployed on any major wildland fire where structures are threatened. You need to know what to do if an aircraft is about to drop retardant on you. Your first consideration should be to move out of the area if time permits you to do so. Stay out from under large trees, as tree limbs or tree tops may break off from the force of the retardant drop. Lie down behind some large immovable object, such as your fire engine or a large rock. Lie down on your stomach, facing the oncoming drop. With your helmet and goggles on, keep your face down, feet apart, and arms out for body stability. Hold any tool you may have away from your body. This video has been prepared to help you understand the elements of wildland fire safety. With its use and review each year, you will be better prepared for your next assignment in the wildland.
That west flank is blowing up. We're already moving. Are Schwartz and Jackson with you? Yeah, they're here. You got everyone else? Yep, we're all here.
Even under the best conditions, fires are unpredictable. Regardless of crew experience level, there may come a time when wind, weather, terrain, and countless other variables will catch you with no escape routes. But there is one last resort. This fire jumped its control line and overran this area in less than 7 minutes. And you and your crew were caught in the middle of it. Just a hypothetical situation, but a very real possibility. Would you and your crew have survived? Would you have known enough about the situation to protect your lungs and airways at all costs? And would you have known when and how to deploy your fire shelter to increase your chances of survival? We have just two objectives with this film. First, that you fully understand that the most important thing during a fire entrapment is to protect your lungs and airways. And secondly, by watching this film and training with the fire shelter, you will know exactly what to do if you're down to your last escape route, your fire shelter. Since its beginning in 1960, the fire shelter has gone through numerous changes, but the basic functions remain the same: to provide cooler, breathable air to protect your lungs and airways, and to minimize radiant heat. The shelter does this primarily by reflecting radiant energy. The aluminum foil outer shell reflects away 95% of the flame front's radiant heat. The remaining 5% is absorbed by the foil glass laminate, which in turn slowly raises the temperature inside the tent. Temperatures may reach over 150 degrees, well within a survivable limit when you consider that dry sauna temperatures are between 180 and 210 degrees. The pup tent shape lets you lie flat on the ground. This is the best position to breathe cooler, cleaner air in order to protect your lungs and airways, and less of your body is exposed to radiant heat and more to ground cooling. The shelter's hold-down system of straps and 6-inch wide skirt keep it from being blown away when buffeted by high winds. The skirt also prevents smoke and hot gases from entering under the shelter's edges. That's how the fire shelter is designed to protect, if you know how to use it correctly. The key to using the fire shelter successfully is knowing when to use it. If the possibility of entrapment arises, always attempt proven escape procedures first. Your immediate supervisor will have located safety areas and escape routes for you in advance. If these escape plans fail, then use the fire shelter as a last resort. It has already saved more than 30 lives, and it can save yours if you ever need it and you know how to use it properly. To deploy your shelter, there are some key points that you should remember. Step 1 is to find a deployment area. The shelter works best in light fuel, such as a grassy meadow, where the fire intensity will be low and the flame front will pass quickly. Avoid fuel that will expose your shelter to prolonged direct flame contact, because this raises the temperature inside the shelter dramatically. Try to pick areas that are natural fuel breaks, such as creek beds, rock slides, or the already burned area of the fire. Remember, fuel includes gasoline cans, supply boxes, backpacks, and any other firefighting gear. Don't deploy your shelter near any of these items. Avoid areas with heavy brush, trees with low branches, or nearby snags. Any place where there's a high concentration of fuels that will produce high temperatures for an extended period of time near your shelter. This might be a good time to mention entrapment without a shelter. Granted, this should not happen, but it has. If you're caught without a shelter, look for the same light fuel types as you would if you had a shelter. If you have time, make an extra effort to find an indentation like this that may provide cooler, more smoke-free air. Concentrate on taking short, shallow breaths through your nose to protect your airways. Once the fire is around you, there is just one thought that should dominate all your decisions. Protect your lungs and airways at all costs. Keep your nose close to the ground. You can survive third-degree burns, but rarely could you survive burnt lungs or airways. The fire shelter greatly improves your chances of surviving a fire entrapment. Without it, only two things will get you by: luck and a determination to protect your lungs and airways, no matter what. After finding an area to ride out the fire, step 2 is to deploy your fire shelter. You should deploy your shelter before clearing a spot because you don't know how fast the fire will reach you. If you open it first, you'll have it ready whenever you need it. First, remove the shelter from the case. Pull the vinyl tab and remove it. Then open it up. Sometimes the pull tab may separate from the tear strip, leaving a small hole like this. Place your finger inside the hole and pull down on the tear strip. If there is no hole, use a knife or any other sharp object to open the bag. Once your shelter is open, you can move on to step 3, finding a specific spot for your shelter. Jim is going to help demonstrate the proper way to get into your shelter and what to do once you're inside. After your shelter is open, find a specific deployment spot, as free of fuels as possible. Scrape an area 4 feet by 8 feet, as Jim has done here if time permits. In light fuels such as these, you could even burn out with a fusee, but if you do so, remember to be aware of the safety of other crew members and other crews that may be in the area. Also, it's important not to leave your shelter unattended while you are clearing your spot, as it could blow away. The idea is to keep the air inside the shelter as cool and as smoke-free as possible. This can best be achieved by ensuring that there are no fuels either under or in close proximity to your fire shelter. Now you are ready for the last step, getting under the shelter. Wear your hard hat, gloves, and web gear for added protection. Hold the shelter upright and step into it. Make sure you're behind all of the hold-down straps. Once inside, place your feet and hands in the corners of the shelter to take out the extra slack and provide a solid base for holding the shelter down. Be sure to position your shelter so your feet are toward the oncoming flame front to take the greatest amount of heat. Once you commit yourself to your shelter, stay there. No matter how bad things get inside, they're much worse outside. Even if you are getting burned, don't panic and leave. Breathing the hot gases outside will threaten you much more than any condition you will face by staying underneath it. Stay put. Wait until a supervisor contacts you or the shelter is cool to the touch before leaving it. We've cut out the side of this shelter so you can see inside while Jim demonstrates. When you first get under the shelter, put your hands and feet on the hold-down straps to keep the skirt pressed to the ground. Remember, it will be very difficult to keep all the edges on the ground during extreme turbulence from a passing flame front. If one edge of the shelter does lift off the ground, turn your face away. To reduce smoke inhalation, cover your mouth with a dry bandana, not wet. A wet cloth produces high humidity air, which is harder to breathe than dry air, and will damage your lungs at a much lower temperature. For extra protection, take short, shallow breaths, especially as the temperature rises. Also, you may notice pinholes or cracks in your shelter. Firefighters that have gone through actual entrapment stated that light shining through these holes on their pants or shirt appeared to be burning coals, and they questioned the effectiveness of their shelters. Don't worry, all shelters have pinholes and cracks. They don't compromise the shelter's ability to protect you. Just a few other things you should know about entrapment. First, it's important to maintain communication, both from shelter to shelter by yelling to one another and by radio contact with the outside. Communication is a key factor in keeping people calm. If your radio won't transmit from underneath the shelter, keep trying at regular intervals, but be careful to maintain the correct position. Never put your head outside the shelter to improve transmission. Second, never plan to share a shelter. It's only designed for one person. But if someone is without a shelter, then sharing is essential. Third, in a long entrapment, as the shelter continues to heat up, the cloth laminate becomes hot enough to burn you. Your hard hat, gloves, and fire clothes should protect you. Above 500 degrees, the adhesive begins to break down, and the cloth may separate from the foil shell like this. Even if it does, it usually delaminates gradually enough that it will cool off before touching you. Even without the cloth, the foil will stay in place and continue to protect you and provide you with breathable air. And last, don't be reluctant to deploy your fire shelter if you need to. Some firefighters who have been caught in fires mention some delay in their decision to deploy because of the monetary cost or embarrassment. Time is critical. Play it safe and give yourself enough time. This film only gives you the basics. It's important that from here you take this knowledge into training sessions where you can practice using your fire shelter. Deploying a shelter can take an untrained person several minutes, but after just a few trials, this can be cut to 25 seconds or less. Before taking your shelter into the field, it should be inspected. First, look at the vinyl bag. You should be able to see most damage through the plastic case. Abrasion is the most common damage, leaving a gray residue inside the case. However, the shelter may still be usable. If you can't determine the condition of the shelter by looking through the vinyl bag, you can slit the bag along the bottom seam and remove the shelter to inspect it. Look for tears along folded edges, especially the sharply creased edges on the top and bottom. Also look for dents and punctures in the foil and remove any shelters with holes or tears greater than 1 inch. If the shelter is still usable, put it back in the plastic case with a signed and dated inspection tag. Reseal the case with glass tape. After you've inspected your fire shelter and okayed it for field use, there are several care and handling guidelines to follow. Keep your shelter away from sharp objects that may puncture it. Avoid as much rough handling as possible. Don't load heavy objects on top of fire shelters. Don't sit on it and use it as a pillow. Don't lean against objects when wearing the shelter. Now, to recap. To deploy the shelter, these are the main steps. Step 1 is to find a deployment area. A natural fuel break or light flashy fuel area is best. Be careful to stay away from high concentrations of fuel and nearby snags. Step 2. Deploy your shelter before clearing an area, so your shelter is out and ready to use whenever you need it. Just yank the pull tab, take the shelter out of the vinyl bag, and open it up. Step 3. Clear an area for your fire shelter, 4 feet by 8 feet or larger if you have time. Lastly, get underneath your shelter. Once underneath your shelter, there are several things to remember. The number 1 priority throughout your entrapment is to protect your lungs and airways at all costs. Wear your hard hat, web gear, and gloves for added protection. Position your shelter so your feet are toward the flame front, taking the greatest amount of heat. Keep your nose to the ground to breathe the coolest, most smoke-free air. You can even dig out a small hole for your face to keep it even closer to the ground, and cover your face with a dry bandana. Maintain communication if possible by yelling to each other and by making radio contact with other firefighters. But always keep the correct position inside your shelter to protect your lungs and airways. Don't be reluctant to deploy your shelter. The monetary loss or embarrassment is insignificant compared to the time you lose by waiting too long. Once inside your shelter, stay there. Wait until a supervisor tells you to move or the flame front has passed. Don't take any chances that you'll leave your shelter too early and expose yourself to superheated air. The last step in fire shelter training is for you to practice what you've learned here, to be more confident in the fire shelter's ability to protect you and your ability to use it. Chances are you'll never have to use your fire shelter. I hope not. But if you do, you'll have a better chance of surviving a fire like this if you know when and how to use your fire shelter. During the 1985 fire season, severe fires burned throughout the country. These blazes forced several crews to deploy fire shelters. We now estimate the shelter has saved over 140 lives, and that number increases each year. The largest single entrapment occurred August 29, 1985, on the Salmon National Forest in Idaho. 73 firefighters deployed shelters in these safety zones on the Butte Fire. We estimate the shelter saved 60 lives on this fire alone. These firefighters were interviewed soon after their entrapment. Portions of these interviews follow to let you hear how they feel about the fire shelter.
We got to a point where we couldn't stay down there any longer. We all threw our fusees in the woods and ran down here where you can see the shelters. And I looked around to make sure my crew was popping their shelters. No one was running, and that everybody made sure they had gloves on and that they were getting in their shelters and as calmly as they could, trying to keep them calm. And the last thing I remember seeing before I went in was a wall of flame across this cat line, as far as I could see either way, into the smoke, and about 200, 300 feet high. Just all you could see was flame, and I ducked in my shelter.
And while in the shelter, you can expect winds in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range. While we were in there, it did get hot. Gloves were an absolute necessity as far as being able to hold the sides of the shelter down. In the strong winds, the shelter's going to flap. It's going to come down right over your head, and it's going to hit your back. It didn't seem to make any difference as far as its effectiveness.
During the time, though, you know, everybody was really scared because you didn't know what to expect. I think that was probably the worst thing about it, was just really didn't know what to expect. Once we were down and it hit us, we were pretty much talking to each other after it hit us, because when it did hit us, the noise was just, it was tremendous. You know, it was like all these jets just flying over you. So we were all just talking to each other, trying to get our mind off the fire and joking around as much as we could. You know, everybody knew, though, that it was pretty serious. You know, it was definitely a life and death matter.
About an hour later, when the smoke was kind of clearing up a little bit and the heat kind of went down a little bit, I tried to get a head count out of all the people, but I tried it 3 or 4 times and couldn't get it because the smoke kept coming.
One of the most important things that came out of this was that even though there are holes in these shelters, that they still worked. They, you know, there was ways to get around. If the hole was on the bottom, you could tuck it under you, or you could try to hold it shut. Or these little ones, you could feel the heat coming through, but you could move far enough away where it wouldn't hurt you. Even though the shelter was in bad shape, it still saved lives.
And the only thing I got to say for a fire shelter, treat them and treat them right. They save our life. Don't mistreat them. And make sure when you get a new person that they know how to use it. Don't just handle a fire shelter to an individual and expect him to use it. Give him some training. And don't mistreat it. Don't sit on a shelter, because you're going to put some creases in there. Because some of the shelters we had in here, they had rips in there, holes and everything, I guess for a misuse or a lot of use. So whatever you do, take care of that shelter. Don't walk around the woods without it. You save our lives, you might save yours.
About the shelters, I'm here, you know, today because of them. I'm really convinced of that. They saved my life, and they saved the lives of my crew. I think when I die, I'll go to heaven, because I spent my time in hell right down there.